Welcome to the ANSERS Institute webinar series on response to intervention. The Alice Neely Special Education Research and Service Institute is part of the College of Education at Texas Christian University. The ANSERS Institute strives to provide high-quality professional development for teachers and school leaders. This webinar, supported by the Morris Foundation of Fort Worth, is meant to further your professional development. We hope you enjoy it. The topic of this webinar is Response to Intervention, the Role of Explicit Instruction. The webinar features Dr. Anita Archer, a nationally known educational consultant on the design and delivery of effective instruction.
Welcome to all of you. So we are going to be talking about response to intervention and a topic that is very critical to all of you. And we're going to particularly look at the instructional aspects, and I've given this the title Prevention and Intervention, because we're going to look at explicit instruction that is absolutely useful in intervention, Tier 2, Tier 3, but also is definitely a necessity for prevention in Tier 1. And our time is short, but we're going to cover sort of the big ideas about the kind of instruction that is helpful both for prevention and intervention. If you want to read more about this, I had the great honor last year of publishing a book with Charles Hughes at Penn State on explicit instruction. And we called it Effective and Efficient Teaching. We have a website that is listed here, www.explicitinstruction.org, that has little videos that would illustrate explicit instruction in Tier 1, 2, and Tier 3, both elementary and secondary. And also, the very first chapter of the book, which is a review of research the last 30 years on what do we know about the most effective instruction, is a free download on that website. You know, I'm going to start with the most common question that I am asked, and that is, what is explicit instruction, and when would we use it? So, explicit instruction, as defined in Ideas That Work, an excellent resource for all of us, reviews of research, refers to it as very systematic instruction. And so it's not random, it is very systematic, and it addresses both delivery of instruction as well as the design of instruction. And when we defined it in our text, we talked about it being unambiguous, that there's no way that you're not going to get it from the instruction. Of course, that is the job of good instruction, is to ensure that the students learn the content, the skills, the vocabulary that we are teaching. So we're going to look at it. I have the feeling for many of you who are listening in and following this webinar that this is going to reinforce exactly what you do, what you train other teachers to do, but sometimes it's very good to be acknowledged for what we do. So, first question I'm always asked is, what is it? Second question is, when should we use it? And shouldn't we be using discovery instead? Won't that be more authentic? Well, I think it is helpful for us to look at this in terms of sort of a continuum of instruction. You know, we often treat explicit instruction and discovery as sort of two separate camps, as if you're either in the explicit instruction camp or you're over here in the discovery camp. But it really should be viewed as a continuum. It's not really an either-or. It is a win. Win based on what you're teaching, win based on who you're teaching. So looking at this little chart, when you look at the research in terms of when you'd want to use explicit instruction, the major variable is the amount of background knowledge that the individual and the students you're teaching have. If you're teaching an area where the students have very little or no background knowledge, then they're really going to profit from very explicit instruction. On the other hand, if they have a great deal of background knowledge in a domain, then very structured discovery might be appropriate. And let me just use a personal example. A few weeks I had the gift of doing a seminar for 3 days in Australia, and I had a wonderful time. But on the way back, I put my computer bag up above, and a gentleman stuffed luggage on top of it, and thus broke the glass on my Macintosh. So I came home, and I needed to get a new computer. And so we looked up the inventory of computers. And the first one I bought was in 1977. The very first day Apple personal computers came out, I was there. I got it. And, I didn't know what a menu was. I didn't know what a mouse was. I didn't know word processing. Basically, I had no background knowledge. So would a teacher have been useful? Absolutely. I needed instruction. I needed input. Now, in my office today, ready for me to transfer information to it, is my 29th Macintosh product. And now I have so much background knowledge that I can discover it. I can read the manual myself. Of course, it's a Macintosh. It doesn't come with a manual, but I can figure it out myself. But it was a perfect example of where explicit instruction was needed with no background knowledge, but when I had a great deal, it wasn't needed. But if you reflect on many of the things that you teach, whether you are a general ed teacher or a special ed teacher or an interventionist at Tier 2, much of what we teach, the students don't have background knowledge on, and they really are going to profit from us teaching them very explicitly. Now, if you look at that chart, there is another variable that speaks to all of us who work in response to intervention Tier 2 or Tier 3, and that is, what is the history of the students? Have they experienced difficulty? Have they experienced failure? Or have they had in that area a huge amount of success? Now, in Tier 2 and Tier 3, most of our students have had difficulty obtaining information. And so they have a mindset often that they're not going to learn reading skills with ease or math skills with ease or writing skills with ease. And so we want to set them up for success, and very explicit instruction has a high probability of doing that. So it isn't an either-or. It is a win, but when we're talking about response to intervention, much of what we teach in Tier 1, they have no background for, and we need to use explicit instruction. And most of what we teach in Tier 2 and Tier 3 would need also explicit instruction because lack of background knowledge and history of failure. I think this is very useful for us to keep in mind. Now, as we were reading all the research to respond to all of the topics in our text, it appeared to me that these 3 words really describe explicit instruction. That it is systematic and it is relentless. And relentless refers to practice. Because if I want you to be a writer, you're going to have to write. If I want you to be a reader, you're going to have lots of practice. If I want you to be able to do math skills, you're going to need a lot of practice. And I actually believe that it is the relentless part often that we are not attending to. But the instruction also has to be engaging. And so when we looked at the research, much of it was on the delivery of instruction to make it more engaging. So I've organized our webinar around those 3 words, that it's systematic and relentless and engaging. So let's start with systematic. And basically what I'm going to do is share with you the findings really from the last 30 years of good instruction, where they have done studies that were observation studies, studies that were correlation, studies that were intervention, and really looked at what do those teachers that make a significant difference do. Often what we refer to now as value-added teachers, meaning that teachers teaching the same demographics, that one teacher's students make a significant difference. So we can look at the systematic aspect both in terms of content as well as the design of instruction. And so let's first start with the content. And the first thing that is very obvious is that those teachers that make the most difference, Tier 1, 2, or 3, that they focus in on very critical content, that they teach the skills and strategies that are really going to empower students, that they pick out of vocabulary necessary for a passage those words that the students can use again and again. That will be empowering to them, that they hone in on what's going to make the most difference. Now, in Tier 2 and Tier 3, this has to even be more critical, more focused on it, because if I have a student that is significantly below their peers, and I am giving them additional help in Tier 2 or Tier 3, I want to accelerate their progress so that they make maybe even more than a year's gain, so we can reduce the gap between them and their peers. And that means we have to make even better decisions about what we're going to teach. Will it make the most difference? I've long had the philosophy in Tier 2 and Tier 3 that in terms of content, we need to teach the stuff and cut the fluff. Anything that is not essential simply would not be a part of what we did in Tier 2 and Tier 3. And, of course, our students benefit from it being organized logically, from easy to difficult, high frequency to low frequency, teaching prerequisites first, separating things, it and F, having them one mastered before the next. So we've honed in and sequenced it, and we get curriculum materials that would do that. But I am particularly concerned about the next one. Whether you're using Common Core standards or Texas standards, what they do is they announce what we want students to do at the end of a year. But they cannot be taught in one lesson. They have to be broken down into obtainable pieces so that students can gain them. And I'm just going to use one example. It was a standard for fifth graders. It says that they will write an opinion piece on topics or text supporting a point of view with reasons and information. Oh my goodness! That is so much. And we most definitely could not teach that in one lesson. So we have to put it into manageable components so that the students can actually process it using working memory. And that is too much. Now, the amount that we have to break it down would differ. The pieces that we would be teaching might be smaller in Tier 2 and Tier 3 than in Tier 1. But both groups would benefit from us breaking it down. So from my work with my colleague of 30 years that we've written many things together, Dr. Mary Gleason, we're utilizing this sequence of instruction, which really takes this down to the point where a Tier 2 student could obtain it. And so we start by giving kids a plan. They have a position, they have a reason, they have details, and they don't even have to plan it. All we're working on first is the difficult step of transcribing a plan into coherent sentences and paragraphs. And once they master that, then we teach them how to plan, where they have a position, and they figure out the reasons and the details that they want to use to support those reasons, and they transcribe it into coherent, not stream of unconsciousness, but coherent paragraphs. And they practice writing the body of a opinion paper. In fact, they write 1 body, 2 body, 3 body, 4, 5 body, 6 body, in some cases more. And all they do is write the body. And then we teach them how to write an introduction. And we taught them to grab the attention of the reader, to state opinion, and then preview the reasons. Grab the attention, state your opinion, preview the reasons. And then they go back and write one introduction, 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 to the previous bodies, but they get the practice of writing it again and again and again, making their introductions better and better. And then we introduce the conclusion that wraps it up, and they write conclusions for all of those papers. And then finally we get to the standard. But if we try to teach that standard in one lesson, even for 3 lessons, and don't break it down to manageable, then we have what is often referred to as cognitive overload. All of us have experienced it. So there's more information than we can handle. So when we looked at the research on explicit instruction in terms of systematic content, what we saw was that there's focused in, sequenced it, and broke it into manageable parts. Well, we are going to now look at the instruction. And as we look at this, these variables that we're seeing again and again in the most competent teachers, you'll recognize them. And it's not that we haven't been taught them. It's not that we're not exposed to them. It's just that we don't always use them as consistently as we might need. So here is what they found in terms of the lessons. Not surprising, in explicit instruction necessary for Tier 1, 2, and 3, the teachers who made the most difference had very organized lessons and very focused. You went in and sat down and you said, they are teaching a comprehension strategy. They are introducing how to figure out the meaning of an unknown word using context clues. They are teaching how to locate the word in a glossary and substitute the meaning in a sentence. They are teaching how to write the introduction to a passage. And it was so obvious to the visitor, to the teacher, to the students, what was being taught and are they focused on it. And then not only was it focused, but the teacher actually announced it. This is the goal of the lesson. And they also did review. Now, here is the most important thing that I'm finding about review, is that it must be interactive. And that's the problem with the webinar. It's more difficult to make it interactive. But the review must be interactive. If the teacher just says, for example, yesterday we looked at the legislative branch, and we're going to review it now. Remember, it could also be called the Congress, which includes the Senate and the House of Representatives. And when we looked at both of these, we learned that they had 2 missions to make law, as well as to go over and determine the how tax money will be spent, what will be the budget. And we looked at See, now the problem with that kind of review, non-interactive, is that the students have totally checked out. No one is processing it. All we know at this moment is that the teacher knows the content. We don't know if the students do. So it must be interactive. Let me just try another example. And you pretend you're the student. So yesterday we looked at the legislative branch. And we learned one word for that. Ones. Pretend you have a partner. Ones. Turn to your partner and tell them the one word that we could use for the legislative branch. And everybody, what is it? Yes, it is the Congress. And there were 2 parts to the Congress. We first had the House of, what, everyone? Representatives, good. And the other branch? 2s. Whisper to your partner. What is it? Yes, the Senate. So if there's one thing we could work on in review, is making it interactive. And then, not surprising, those value-added teachers also did step-by-step demonstrations. And, of course, this did not surprise me. So if I'm a language arts teacher, I might be demonstrating a comprehension strategy or vocabulary or how to write a summary. If I'm a math teacher, I might be teaching an algorithm or a strategy for problem solving, and I would demonstrate it. Do you know what was interesting is that in one recent study of language arts teachers who were particularly proficient at the middle school level, they not only demonstrated those big things, but little things. For example, one example was given in the study is one teacher in middle school said, watch me, you're going to fold a piece of paper in half, and actually modeled it. And the students thus knew exactly what they were supposed to do. You know, and this would match what I know from my 46 years of teaching, is that every time I choose not to model something, I've just chosen to model it many times. This student didn't get it, this student didn't understand, this student didn't understand. So it is demonstrating the skills and strategies we want kids to learn, but also little things in the moment that we want them to do, actually showing them how to do it. So the lessons are organized. I shared the goal with you. We have review, and we have demonstrations. Following the demonstrations, those value-added teachers consistently provided guided practice. And this is the hallmark of very good instruction, Tier 1, Tier 2, or Tier 3. I don't just model it and then say, now you do it. I model it and then I lead you through it, step by step, so that you are very, very successful. And between the demonstration and the guided practice, I am careful to use very clear and concise language so that you have the same language in the model as when I am guiding you. Now, these are things that we knew. It really is putting them into practice, not occasionally, but every lesson. Every lesson in Tier 1, in Tier 2, in Tier 3, these variables need to be in place. Now, in the course of working on this book, we reviewed articles that talked about lesson plans, and it was quite entertaining because we found the 6-step lesson plan, we found the 12-step lesson plan, we even found the 24-step lesson plan, which none of us would ever have time to fill in before we taught the next day. But there was a consistency, and that consistency is shown here, that in those lessons, there was consistently an opening, and then a body to the instruction, and then a closing. Now, I just want you to lean over and touch on your screen. Which part do you think is most often deleted from lessons? Do you think it's the opening, the body, or the closing? I have a feeling that your finger is on closing because that was what was most often missing. And sort of many lessons sort of ended like this, according to the observation studies that have asked this question, where you just simply say, everyone, put your things away, line up, we're out of here. That there really is no dignity at the end. But it is useful to have not only a formal opening where we gain their attention, we go back and do review, and don't forget, it's interactive, where the students are having to make responses throughout. And we preview, we tell them the goal of the lesson. And then we teach the lesson, and at the end, we go back and review, and we tell them what we're going to do tomorrow, a little preview. Even though this is quite simplistic, it's very powerful. If all of our lessons contain these elements, it would make a significant difference. So let's now look at the body of the lesson and some of those things that emerge to make that instruction, whether it's in math or reading or writing or even in content areas, science, social studies, and health, what might we want to have in that? Now, one of the things that I think is very useful to remember is the power of what is referred to as instructional routines. Now, instructional routines simply mean that when I'm introducing something, and I'm going to use certain steps to introduce it, and when I introduce something that is parallel to it, I'm going to use the same steps. For example, maybe I'm teaching young children, and we are going to sound out words. And so we go through the same steps. I ask them what the first sound is, ask them what the next sound is. I have them blend those sounds together. I ask them what the third sound is. We blend all of them together, and then I ask them what word. On the next word, I say same thing. What sound, blend it, what sound, blend it, what word. Now, if you were to look at research-validated programs in Tier 2 and Tier 3, particularly, one of them will not have instructional routines. All of them will. And that's because they have such great use to the teacher as well as to the students. And so this is one of the hallmarks of intervention programs. Not only do they teach the stuff and cut the fluff and focus in on what makes a difference, but they have these instructional routines. So let's just think, what's the benefit to the teacher? Well, one big benefit is if I am using those instructional routines, let's say it's a vocabulary routine, and I use it again and again and again, I, as the teacher, get automaticity in my teaching. I have a perkier pace, a much more brisk pace. And as a result, the students are more attentive because the pace is moving along, because I've got that routine down, and it will also reduce their errors because they'll be more attentive. I think that even more importantly is the benefits to the students. Now, no matter what we're teaching, there's always two things that students have to attend to. One, they have to attend to the content that we are teaching. Let's say it's this vocabulary word. But they also have to attend to the task that we're using. Now, of course, where would we want the students' cognitive energy to go? Yeah, on the content. And the only way we can have it only on the content is to hold the task consistent, so that on the first vocabulary word we go through certain steps, on the second vocabulary word we go through certain steps, on the third one we do the same steps, on the fourth one, so the kids become familiar with it and they can put all of their attention on the content. And so I just want us to be aware that this is a hallmark feature of very good intervention programs. And sometimes teachers will say, well, won't it be boring? No, the kids are successful. They are comfortable. They know what's going to happen. They know that they're getting gains in what they are doing. And so not at all. And not only that, you as teachers, you're going to add to all those routines your warmth, your perky pace, your active participation, and so it will be rich for the students. Now, there are some instructional routines that are somewhat generic. So let's look at two of the things that you most often teach. And one, you teach kids how to do something, a skill or a strategy. And there's a certain instructional routine that's generic for that. And then you teach them also vocabulary. And there is a routine that would be important for that. So let's look at both of those. So we could teach students strategy for strategies as well as skills. All through the grades we do that. So maybe you're a primary teacher and you're teaching the students the skill of handwriting, how to form the letters. Maybe you are a teacher working with first graders and you're teaching them the skill of sounding out words. Maybe you are a third grade teacher and you're teaching them a strategy, certain steps for comprehension. I recently had a chance to teach paragraph shrinking, a strategy that came out of the work of Lynn and Doug Fuchs and Pat Mathis, where they are asked, after they read a paragraph, name the who or what, tell the most important thing about the who or what, and say it in 10 words or less. And that is a strategy. I also had a chance to teach students in upper grades how to add paragraphs to a story, because their stories had one paragraph, and so they learned a strategy. Ask yourself, is there a change in the speaker? Is there a change in the setting? Is there a change in the situation? Is there a change in time? If any of those happen, you need a paragraph. And I taught high school students recently how to take Cornell notes, another strategy. So all through the grades, we teach kids how to do things, skills, and strategies. And so over time, we've had many different vocabulary used to talk about the pedagogy, the instructional steps that we would use for teaching kids skills and strategy. Madeline Hunter talked about demonstration, guided practice, checking for understanding, wording that is very familiar to us from our own teacher training. Some of you are interventionists or special ed teachers. You may have used a direct instruction program, and they talk about model, lead, and test. You know, model, lead, and test is demonstration, guided practice, checking for understanding. Long ago, 1977, on my new Apple computer, I wrote an article, a training manual on instruction, and I used the terms I do it, we do it, you do it. Now they're kind of widely used terms. But even again, in their simplicity, they have great power. Because if I'm teaching you a sound, I say the sound, we say the sound, you say the sound. If I am teaching you how to write a paragraph, I write a paragraph, maybe I model it again, I write a paragraph, and then we write a paragraph, we write a paragraph, we write a paragraph, and then I fade out a little bit of my support and scaffolding. We write a paragraph, we write a paragraph, we write a paragraph. Now you're looking good, and you write a paragraph. Even in that high school when I taught Cornell notes, I took notes, I took notes, and we took notes, and we took notes, and we took notes. It was a Tier 2 group. So we took notes, and we took notes, and we took notes, and then I faded out my assistants. We took notes, we took notes. And they looked very good, and they took notes, which they practiced a very long time. So it's so helpful if we just get in mind these steps, because some of the models that we use are simply not going to be helpful to students that have potential learning challenges. For example, a model such as I do it, now you do it. Then we're leaving out the most powerful part of explicit instruction, which is actually that scaffolding where here's the task, here are our students, and we have to lift them up. We have to scaffold it in a way. We have to use that we do it, that guided practice to get them up there. So we have to be certain that we aren't just saying, watch me, now you do it. We've got to do, I do it, now I'm going to scaffold and support you in it, and now you do it. So as we were writing this book, we also came up with sort of a generic way of teaching vocabulary. After reviewing many, many studies, many books written about vocabulary. And this one also very powerful. I could use it in kindergarten. I could use it in 12th grade. I could use it in a math class, a science class, a social studies class, a reading class, because the task is explicitly teaching the meaning of a word. So we would introduce the word. For example, one day in 7th grade, I taught the term compulsory. And so I just said, this word is compulsory. What word? And the students said compulsory. I had them repeat it a few times to ensure that they could say it accurately. And then I provided a student-friendly explanation, as Isabel Beck and Margaret McCoon would label it. One that included known words and was easy to understand. So I told them, when something is compulsory, it is required and you must do it. And then I illustrated it with examples. that if you're driving and came to a stop sign, it is compulsory that you stop. So many drivers have not yet learned that. But anyway, if you are an 8th grader, it is compulsory that you come to school. It is required. And then I check their understanding by asking them questions. What are some things that are compulsory in this middle school? And they gave them a sentence starter. One thing that is compulsory at this middle school is, and they had to complete it. And so we're empowered as teachers by having this kind of instructional routine because we can master it, we can use it with automaticity, we can have a brisk pace as a result, and our students will be more attentive. So all of this falls under that category of systematic. But let's say if I taught you that word, compulsory, and I never returned to it. We never reviewed it. We never had practice on it. It would fall right out of your repertoire. And that takes us to the second big word that defines explicit instruction, which is relentless. That we know if a learner is going to obtain and retain information, that there has to be adequate practice. And that practice needs to be relentless. Now, let me use from my private life an experience that has really taught me this. So I'm 65 at the moment, and when I was 62, I started to learn things that were difficult that I'd never done before. And I took up the cello. I got a wonderful cello. Actually, I now have numerous cellos. In fact, my teacher thinks I'm better at collecting cellos than actually playing the cello. And I have a 2:30 slot with my teacher, Hamilton Tvets, on Saturdays. He's actually head of strings at Portland State University. A wonderful cellist. Okay? And the person right before me, I knew because she started lessons at the exact same time I did. We became friends because we're always meeting on Saturdays, so much so that I love coming early and listening to her. So one day, I am sitting out and listening to her, and she is playing on her cello Bach Fifth Concerto for Cellos by memory. I mean, it was beautiful. And that day, I was working once again on Ode to Joy, hoping that someone might recognize it. So when I went into my lesson, I said to my teacher, Hamilton, why do you think Annie is making so much more gain on cello than I am? Why is Annie, who's 6, doing so much better? And he said to me, Anita, it's one word. That word is practice and more practice and more practice. Now, as it turns out, I'm actually a Tier 3 cellist. And so I've had my experience now as a true special ed student in the area of cello. But look at the statement down below. In Sharon Vaughn's research and her research group have concluded that students who are Tier 3 need 10 to 30 times as many practice opportunities as their Tier 1 peers. So, if I'm going to get as good as Annie, who practiced about 3 hours a day, I'm going to need maybe 10 times as much practice. Well, it probably won't occur in this life, though I adore cello, but it's been such a great teaching tool for me in terms of both instruction as necessary if you're Tier 3, but also the amount of practice. Now, when we look at the practice, there's actually 3 kinds of practice that students need. Initial practice, so if I introduce compulsory to you and I ask questions about it, you're getting some initial practice, just like I get initial practice in my cello lesson. But all of the practice cannot be massed into that one episode. We also need to have distributed practice over time, small amounts of practice, which means that on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and Friday I need to have small practice sessions of my cello. And then it has to be coupled with cumulative review. If I ever master a song in cello, which has not yet happened, I need to go back and review it if it's going to stay in my repertoire. So just again, because, every teacher has to examine their curriculum and ask this question: is there an adequate amount of practice? And if not, I need a plan. And it's not just initial practice when I'm first teaching a skill. It is distributed practice in short sessions over time, so that the students have that possibility of going from accuracy even into more automaticity, and then that cumulative review. I'm particularly concerned about this issue because we've actually sort of demified practice. Yeah, we have mottos like drill and kill. I have not heard of one reported incident of children dying because we asked them, do one more problem, dead. Please, let's reread this passage one more time so we can do close reading, dead. Even internationally, let's write one more essay, dead. In fact, that motto is totally out of order in terms of what we know from the brain research and we know from instructional research, that both of those bodies of knowledge would tell us that if we want to retain information, that we're going to have to practice it. In the brain research, if we want to retain it, we're going to have deep neural pathways so that we can retain it. So I think it's much more accurate to say the motto should be drill and skill. Enough practice, and it's judicious practice, enough practice that we will retain it. And, if I ever get to the point where I can play something beautifully and maybe even from memory and everybody recognizes it, I will have drill and thrill. So let's be certain that Tier 1, 2, and 3 have adequate practice. Because right now, I see a lot of children that are exposed to content, but without the judicious practice, they do not retain it. So we end up with lots of overexposed and underdeveloped children. The third element is the element of engagement, which is all in the delivery. And we could have spent a whole webinar just on delivery, but let's look at the big points that emerges from the research on explicit instruction. One is good instruction, Tier 1, 2, or 3. The students are giving frequent responses. It's interactive. I say something, you say something, I write something, you write something, I do something, you do something. It never can be I say something, I say something, I say something, I say something, I say something. See you tomorrow. This, to me, is probably, particularly at the secondary level, the missing component, is constantly having students say things, write things, do things. Why is it so critical? It's essential to learning. Every time we ask kids to make a response, they have to retrieve that content. Then they respond, and they have a higher probability they will retain it. For me, the big 3 R's are retrieve, respond, retain. Say it with me. Retrieve, respond, retain. Now, of course, we're going to listen carefully to what the students say, what they write, what they do. We're going to monitor their responses so we can give them feedback. I have been very interested recently about all of the emerging research on feedback. Maybe you have the book Visible Learning by John Hattie, Hattie. If you don't have it, it's definitely a valuable resource for all of us. And he looked at more than 900 meta-analyses, sort of trying to find the holy grail of education. What makes the most difference? And Explicit instruction made a great deal of difference. Active participation made a great deal of difference. One that was very, very powerful was feedback. That we asked students to do a math problem, and then we immediately, in real time, give them feedback. And in that moment, learning occurs. We asked them to write a paragraph, and we are moving around the room, giving them feedback in real time. And in that moment, where we give them corrections, where we give them encouragement, where we give them affirmation and praise, feedback, the students have enhanced learning. I just think that this is something we've not attended to as much as we need to, and the power of feedback. And then that the pace is brisk, that it moves along. And sometimes in webinars it's too brisk, but then, of course, you can always listen to it again. But that it isn't frenetic. There's plenty of thinking time, but it moves along. And though we're not going to be able to go through every detail in this material, is more information on each of those. What kind of responses, from verbal responses to written responses to responses that act out. It's really not exactly which response we use, but is it frequently done so the kids are engaged? And we are going to monitor, and when the kids are at their desk and we ask them to write something down, we're going to be moving around and circulating, walk around, look around, talk around. And we're going to give them feedback. It might be corrective feedback. It might be affirmation or praise. And it's going to be at a brisk pace so that there are no big digressions. It moves along. You know, the whole point of this is this. Whether it's Tier 1, 2, or 3, we concluded, the research concludes, that how well we teach equals how well they learn. And so we have to provide the highest quality of instruction so that the students are set up for success, that they will have a high probability of learning. And so what we've looked at are all the things that come together in explicit instruction for prevention in Tier 1, for intervention in Tier 2 and Tier 3 that make a difference. Now, I bet there are perhaps some questions that have come in, so I left a few minutes for questions, but as much time as we would have. But Barbara, did we have any questions?
Yes, we do. And Anita, that was absolutely fantastic. I personally have learned a great deal and really enjoyed it. There are a few questions. I'm not going to ask you the ones about the cello, so don't worry.
All right, good.
In particular, there have been questions around explicit instruction and its connection and relevance to struggling learners outside the RTI framework, if you'd like, outside of special ed. Are you able to speak to that?
So, you know, here's the beautiful thing about research on instruction. If you look at the research on what makes a difference, let's say with English language learners, the attributes there do not significantly differ from explicit instruction. If you look at the research on what makes a difference for students that are in Tier 3 in special ed, the attributes of what make a difference do not differ. And what we look at, what makes a difference in general ed. To me, this is the beauty. The beauty of instructional research is that if you don't have background knowledge and you are Tier 1, Tier 3, you're a student in special ed, you're an English language learner, you are a general ed student, that the same quality of instruction makes a difference. Now, here's the difference, though. It will be in the amount of practice. It'll be in that I do it, we do it, you do it, more we do it, more guided practice for the students that are struggling. But the major attributes do not make a difference. It's just like my teacher was teaching me cello. Has to do, I do it, we do it, you do it, but it's more like I do it, we 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 do it, now you do it. And so to me, when we look at good instruction, it has universal application.
Thank you. I think this next question here is a wonderful final question for you, and a nice way to gives you an opportunity to sum up. And really, you've explained it to us in so many ways, but in summary, what would you say the biggest way that explicit instruction differs from typical lesson or typical teaching?
So what would be the difference between typical but not maybe optimal instruction and explicit instruction? So first is that it's unambiguous. You're just not going to miss it. The teachers directly modeled it. The teachers guided you in doing it. The teacher has monitored your response, given you feedback, and so it is unambiguous. Second, I would think that the second biggest difference is the amount of active participation, that it is totally interactive at all times. And the teacher is constantly monitoring student responses, and the lesson is adapted on a constant basis. So it's very student-centered because I'm watching what you're doing, changing what I am doing in response to that. And third, it is the amount of practice to ensure that mastery really has occurred. Explicit instruction is not just exposure, it is teaching to mastery what you need to have in the future. Unambiguous, lots of responses, and ensuring that there's adequate amount of practice.
Well, I think that is a beautiful way to conclude. And actually, what I feel like the personal takeaway really on this is the amount of interactivity and student-centeredness.
Probably best seen by watching videos. And so all of the videos that we have on www.explicitinstruction.org are free downloads for teachers to view or people to use in staff development. And I think watching some of those, really the main thing that comes across is the interactive nature of it.
Fantastic. Well, I want to thank you very much. And Dr. Crawford, anything that you would like to add at the end here?
I just want to thank you, Anita. That message that you always share, it's timeless. It's because it works. And I really appreciate you spending some of your time with us this afternoon. And thanks to all the participants today as well.
I was honored to speak for your university. Thank you so much, Lindy. And everyone else, go teach them well, for how well you teach equals how well they learn. Thank you.
Thank you for viewing this presentation of the ANSERS Institute webinar series on response to intervention.